Good evening, all. It's now 6 p.m. and the regular session of the Planning Commission of the City of Lancaster. Please come to order. Tonight, well, we had an invocator, and I'm not sure if they are here. Mr. Ludicky, do we know?
Since no one has stood up and said, I'm that person, I would assume no, we do not.
All right, then. Well, then Vice Chair Hall will offer the invocation, and Commissioner Smith will lead us in the pledge. Please stand, please.
I'm that person. And bow your heads. Thank you, Lord, for allowing us to be here in this meeting tonight to represent the citizens. Thank you for staff that prepares the meeting agenda and all the work that they do to help make this meeting go well. Thank you, God, for allowing us to have a community that grows and continues to be healthy and happy. Thank you for the first responders, our fire, our police, our soldiers, and their families that support them. And thank you, God, for allowing me to be here with you all tonight. Amen.
Amen.
Please place your right hand over your heart and speak with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. May I have the roll call, please?
Commissioners Diana Cook,
Present.
Miguel Coronado, Cassandra Harvey,
Present.
Sandy Smith, here. Fabian Torraciano,
Here.
Vice Chair Randy Hall,
Here.
Chairman James Vose.
Yep.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Public business from the floor. If individuals have other commitments and would like to address us on items early, you're offered 2 minutes at this time. If you can't stay for the entire meeting, typically we call the agenda items and then individuals are invited to speak, assuming they fill out a speaker's card when the item is called. So you're all welcome to fill out a speaker's card to address us on any agenda item. Just for your information, this commission meets usually the week before this public meeting. We do meet in public, however, we do not deliberate. We listen to staff's presentation of the agenda. We ask individual questions if we choose, but we don't interact nor deliberate among ourselves. You may wonder why when items come before us, there may not be any discussion. And that typically is because we've had our questions, individual questions, answered prior to the meeting. However, that doesn't prevent anyone from raising an issue or asking a question or making a statement, any one of our commissioners or the applicant or a member of the public. So you're invited to participate. Tonight we're going to move new business item number 3 to the beginning of the agenda after the approval of the consent calendar. So the next action item is approval of the consent calendar. May I have a motion, please?
Yeah. I'll make a motion for the approval of minutes from the regular meeting of April 25th, 2016.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Anything further? Please vote. All right.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. New business item number 3, which is a proposed amendment to Title V of the Lancaster Municipal Code, business license, operation requirements for alcohol beverage establishments. This is an item that the City Council has asked the Commission to review. However, it does not fall under land use. It falls under Title V, not Title 17. However, the City Council asked us to weigh in on it, and I'm assuming some of the folks that are here tonight may want to speak to us about that, and that's fine. We look forward to it. So this evening, our presenters are Ms. Corbett and Mr. Dorico. All right. right. Whomever would like to start, please start.
Thank you, Chairman Vos. As you mentioned, at the regular meeting on February 23rd, the City Council directed us to review the existing regulations and consider whether it was appropriate to draft an ordinance to restrict the size and/or the quantity of alcoholic beverages purchased for off-site consumption. We've completed that review, and in consultation with public safety personnel and Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies, we've identified some of the problems that are associated with the sale of smaller single-serving sizes. These include loitering, panhandling, excessive noise, public drinking, public urination, littering, and other activities around liquor stores and other types of alcoholic beverage establishments that cause a blight on the community and drain on law enforcement resources. So in reviewing the conditional use permit conditions that this commission has established for those more recent establishments that operate under a CUP, it dawned on us that it would make some sense to establish the same kinds of operating requirements or some of the same operating requirements for all establishments, whether they're deemed approved, as we call them in the municipal code, or whether they're operating under a CUP. We recently amended the general business license chapter 5.04 of the municipal code, and included in those amendments was a provision that authorizes the city to impose conditions on business licenses. This, in essence, would be it's a new section of Chapter 5.04, and it establishes general global operational requirements for certain types of businesses. The only type of business that we're suggesting at the moment is specifically alcoholic beverage establishments that sell for off-site consumption. So the ordinance before you identifies the types of alcoholic beverages at issue and sets some limits in terms of size and or quantity or volume that can be sold or that can be purchased at off-site sales establishments. And it carves out a couple of exemptions for those kinds of establishments that tend to not have the nuisance conditions and nuisance activities that are associated more with liquor stores and mini-marts. So in other words, Albertsons or Vons that sells liquor for off-site consumption doesn't typically have people panhandling outside in the parking lot to get enough money to buy a single beer. So we've exempted those out. We've also exempted out breweries and micropubs and wineries that in addition to serving on-site also offer alcoholic beverages for off-site. It's a pretty straightforward ordinance. I'm welcome to take any questions, but Mr. DeRico is here so he can talk about specifically some of the issues that we've been seeing in addition to what I've described.
It's interesting because as we just did a preliminary study of all the locations that currently have an alcohol off-site permit through alcohol beverage control, 47 of those locations were grandfathered in without a conditional use permit that exists today. And so based on that list, I just picked 11 random locations just for calls for service over the last 12 months. And of those 11 locations, just randomly that I chose, those accounted for 235 calls for service for a response from the Sheriff's Department. And probably well over 80% of those calls were directly related to single sales of alcohol, creating issues within the parking lot or in front of the location, off-site or on-site consumption based on that single serving. So if you think about that, and just for the public, those deputy sheriffs are about $2.12 per minute based on their contract rate. And a lot of these calls, the majority of them required more than one unit for a response based on the type of activity. So you can see where there's a very large impact on resource management for deployment of our units out there. And again, that's just 11. Now I'm almost afraid to go through the entire list and see what that would really end up in contract resources and what that would take. And historically, some of these locations, and we see them around town, I mean, we have folks, they do that. They'll panhandle for a period of time, just enough to buy that single sale, and then they'll want to consume it, and then they work the parking area or the immediate vicinity of other businesses in the area to purchase that single sale. some of the things that we've done to try and impact that is it's actually against the law to continually sell to a person that's a habitual purchaser of alcohol in your establishment if they're a known alcoholic or you recognize them to be based on the contact with them daily. So those are some of the things we're trying to remedy over on the other side in the laws that exist. But again, if you went through these calls for service and saw what the type of activity was, what the sheriff's department's reporting back to the city as what is an issue that they see as it relates to sales of alcohol at locations for off-premise sales, that seems to be the number one driving issue, is that single sale.
On those 11 service, on those sampling of those 11 stores you looked at, how far back did you go in time on?
That's over a 12-month period.
Thank you.
That's from May 10th of 2015 to May 10th of 2016, 1 year.
So what would, Mr. DiRico, what would be the typical time a deputy might spend or a group of deputies might spend on a call of any nature, but specifically this?
Well, depending on the circumstances and just the contact of the individual, ascertaining certain information, contacting the informant of the call, which is a lot of times we don't want to discourage the liquor store owner or the convenience store owner from calling the sheriff's department when it's appropriate, but typically 20 to 30 minutes. If you have multiple units, and depending on how many individuals they're dealing with, could take longer. If they end up arresting someone, then now we get into the whole booking process, which is another unit out of the field for close to an hour, and the report writing aspect of that, then the processing of the report, which impacts the overhead built into our contract rate. So if you start really looking at that beyond just the service call itself, that's a significant amount of public resources that are being utilized to deal with that issue.
So if it was a domestic violence call, would it be a similar amount of time?
It could be, depending on what the nature and what the actual call determined to be. That would be probably more involved based on some of the things that are required as it relates to domestic violence with temporary restraining orders, those type of things. But the actual booking time and things would be typically the same.
So the nexus between this type of potential, the enforcement issues are responding to calls compared to other types of calls in the sheriff's calls in the community, what would be the typical nexus between the type of?
I would say type of just like a general disturbance issue somewhere, a party, that type of issue there. I think you can make a correlation based on the contact or just it isn't typically what you would have with a normal vagrancy issue because of the alcohol involvement and the use there, the citation process. There is, because there would be paperwork behind it. So it wouldn't be just a contact, warn, advise, and take a walk type thing. There would be something beyond the scope of that.
So you said normal vagrancy requirement. It's already illegal to have people loitering in parking lots and consuming alcohol, isn't it?
Yes.
And in our meeting last week when I brought this up, we were told that we're going to shift the responsibility to the business owner to control their parking lots. Is that the whole purpose of this?
Well, the responsibility is with the individual who is purchasing the alcoholic beverages, but the responsibility is also the business owners to make sure that his or her property, his business and the property on which it's located, is being operated and used in a lawful and safe manner. The Business and Professions Code already does require liquor stores or alcoholic beverages to post the no loitering, no drinking in the parking lot type of signs. I personally, as the city's prosecutor, don't have enforcement authority over that provision. So I can enforce and prosecute for violations of the municipal code. It seems like a natural next step is to let the business owners know that we go after the drinkers and the purchasers, but we're also going to require that they, as the owner, take the steps that they need to make sure that they are operating lawfully and that their patrons are purchasing appropriately.
Didn't you say last Monday in our Monday meeting that one of the people that you prosecuted didn't show up and you were unable to prosecute them? And so then now what we're doing is making the business owner responsible for their customers' behavior, much like what we're going to do with the gun industry. Remington, Colt builds a gun, and suddenly Colt and Remington are responsible for how that gun is used. I don't see how this is a whole lot different than that. I mean, I have a real problem with making a business owner responsible for how their products are used.
But I'm sorry, Mr. Hall, I'm sorry, go ahead and finish, and then I can explain to you, though there is already a certain amount of that as it relates to the alcohol beverage control licensing, especially specifically as it relates to off-premise sale. If they were to come to that same business, they would cite the owner for allowing people to consume alcohol on the premises. That is currently part of that as well. So when they receive that alcohol beverage permit, okay, for selling off-premise sales, that specifically states there is a certain boundary within the scope of that business that they're responsible to make sure that's not taking place.
So it's already illegal, is what you're arguing?
No, my argument is they can be cited, and all that does is affect their alcohol license. Okay, it doesn't have anything to do with their business license. And normally what happens is it's usually some type of penalty when, in fact, the case moves forward of a certain amount of days that they are restricted from selling alcohol.
So the city wants to remove their ability to make a livelihood by restricting their business license?
I don't believe that's the case, sir. I think it specifically relates to one issue, one point, single sales.
But aren't some stores allowed to sell single sales?
That's the purpose of this proposed ordinance, is so that no off-site alcoholic beverage establishment is allowed to sell certain sizes and volumes of single servings.
But it says right here in the ordinance that the proposed new section exempts certain types of alcoholic beverage establishments, those containing space of 10,000 square feet or larger. So we're making an inequity in the law here, aren't we?
Not necessarily, Vice Chair Hall. Our conditional use process, as you may recall, tends to establish a minimum standard for our new applications for these types of uses, which we very typically impose. In some cases, we have imposed stricter compliance requirements on conditional use permit applications beyond the minimum standard. We're not arguing anything. I think the presentation is talking about, at the direction of members of our city council, to take up the issue to establish an ordinance and consider it and make a recommendation to the city council. If we don't necessarily, as a group, agree, or individuals agree or disagree, that'll be reported to the city council. But making the leap from the sale of single Budweiser bottles to my ability to utilize my .45 caliber Browning is a leap that I'm not prepared to make.
But the point I was making on the 10,000 square feet or larger is Albertsons with 10,000 square
by
feet.
our conditional use permit, they are exempt. If you may recall, any retailer of 10,000 square feet or larger are exempt from the conditional use requirements.
But don't they have deeper pockets than a single 47 grandfathered
I don't know. I look at some of
locations?
my stock portfolio and I wonder.
Yeah.
Right?
My point on what I'm bringing up here is that if we're going to have one group over here that can sell single use, and they do have parking lots, and they do have signs up that say no loitering, and then we take the little mom and pop that's under 10,000 square feet because they can't afford to have a bigger building, and if they did move, then they would fall under our CUP. So there would be no problem.
That would be a question I think you might want to raise with the city council member that proposed to do this.
Well, I don't have a problem with making some issues with it. And if they have a problem with that, they can tell me.
Yeah.
And if they do,
Exactly.
I just want to bring up some issues that I think that are inconsistent, and they're not just inconsistent, they're unfair to one business owner versus being allowing stuff to happen with another business owner. And I think that if we're going to be fair, we should have an equality under the law and not a disparate, a difference under the law. And also writing the law after the fact.
That all retailers of alcoholic beverages then be restricted to the single serving as proposed in this ordinance or as modified?
That I don't have a problem with. If we want to be fair, strike that whole section out on the bottom.
I appreciate your position on that, Vice Chairman. As I mentioned briefly, and I didn't ask Mr. DeRico to run those calls, and I guess I should have anticipated that might be an issue and have him do that, but typically we don't have those public nuisance kinds of activities going on in parking lots at Albertsons, at Vaughn's. If we had a Trader Joe's, at least where I used to live, there was never any loitering or public drinking at a Trader Joe's parking lot. Those kinds of activities don't tend to happen at the larger stores. That's why the exemption.
If we had a Trader Joe's, it would be under the CUP and it would be a moot point. But what we have here is we have a written into law discrepancy. One you can't, one you can. And I think that if people took an objective look at this and they would say, how much does Albertson donate to candidate A's campaign and how much does Bob's Liquor donate to, candidate A's campaign? It's nothing compared to Albertsons. And so we need to make sure that we're not creating some sort of inequity here. That's why if you leave that in, I don't see how I could support it. It's not fair. I mean, you can't ask me to put in a law that is obviously, if you're this color, we're going to do this, and if you're that color, we're going to do that. I don't live in that society anymore.
Well, the interesting thing is that we're not being charged with the responsibility of establishing the ordinance and amending the municipal code. All our responsibility is to consider the proposal and make a recommendation. It's not the same thing.
But aren't we considering it now?
Obviously, we're considering it now. It's on the agenda. You bet. One of the things I took the trouble to look up the conditional use permit factors regarding public convenience or necessity. My point of view on this matter, after over 8 years of sitting in this chair and presiding over these kinds of hearings, so this isn't even a hearing, meetings, we've said many times, individually and as a group, we're not regulators. We're just citizens who review applications and make findings and make recommendations. But in reality, we are regulators. We do it every month. We establish regulations. We establish standards. In this particular case, we are not regulating the sale of alcoholic beverages, but if one or all of those 47 establishments that Mr. DeRico pointed out came before us, that's in effect what we're asked to consider tonight. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So my point of view is I'm looking at it as if it were a conditional use permit. How would I view its operation? Would I view the operation that the individual retailer is marketing a single-shot beverage across the counter at $1.50 or whatever they charge? Or am I going to Costco and purchasing that? To me, it's a completely different question of the potential 47 coming before me or the Costco store coming before me. Well, I know Costco doesn't sell it. That's not in their business plan. But I can see no positive purpose, from my point of view, of an individual retailing that single shot because I know what happens to it. It doesn't go in somebody's pocket and they take it home and sit in their dining room chair and have a cocktail. That's not how it works. We all know that. Don't kid ourselves. If anybody wants to make that argument, they can make it all they want. But my point of view is it's a hard argument to convince me. And I have no objection to the sale or consumption of alcoholic beverages. I'm a consumer, So I take your point, though, Vice Chair. I do. But fairness and equity don't necessarily enter into the view that we're dealing with a community blight impact, as I see it. Personally, I see no benefit, and we as collectively have, for the last number of years, denied applications for the sale of alcoholic beverages, particularly spirits. And I don't recall we've ever approved one. You?
I agree with you, and in a normal CUP procedure, I would expect that the law would be applied to all equally.
It's not a law, it's discretionary.
It's
Conditional use
municipal
permit
code.
is discretionary.
Well, yes, and a conditional use permit should apply to everybody equally. If person A and person B have very similar operations, then it should apply to both of them.
Yeah, but
Just
that's
because-
not necessarily the case, and not in every case have we made this exact same finding on every CUP application. We haven't done that.
I was given a voice to be a business advocate. I was given a voice to be a citizen advocate. And at this stage, I just want to express my opinion on this, and that is that I think that there's a problem with that second to last paragraph in the code that you're proposing that we approve to send to City Council. I don't agree with having it. I think that
Anyone else care to offer anything?
Ironically, on my way over here tonight,
Your what?
Ironically, on my way here tonight, I stopped to get a pack of Tic Tacs,
Yes.
and as soon as I got out of my car, I get approached for, do you have any spare money? So what they were wanting it for, I have no idea, but it does get a little frustrating at times.
And you stopped at Vaughn's, right?
No. It was a little convenience store on Avenue L.
Interesting. Anyone else?
Yesterday, Sunday, I went to Albertsons, and there was a whole family asking for money. What did they want it for? Like you said, sir, I don't know. The way that I understand this, Mr. Rico, is that if I decided to approach a small liquor store and ask people for money, and then I go inside and buy one drink, I bring it out, and then I just drink it. That's a problem right now. That's the way I'm hearing it. The family, I'm not sure. The father looked able-bodied, so did the mom. Had 3 little girls and a little baby boy. I immediately texted the vice mayor, and I said, oh my goodness, this is pretty incredible. The way that I see it is that that's a problem in itself, more than selling the person in alcohol, because we have families out there asking for money. It's just not only people that want a beer or a continuous beer. This is a humongous problem we're having. It's really not about a down-and-out person going in, buying a Budweiser, and just swallowing his dilemmas and traumas and dramas. But I think on this situation, I think Vice Chair Hall has a point. If Costco sells a beer to a person and drinks it outside, they should be penalized. If a liquor store from this young man that I met, I wouldn't say that young, but he comes from Cambodia. He's there all the time selling a variety of things. Convenience store. They wiped out his whole family in Cambodia. He had nothing, and he came here with nothing, and he built a liquor store with his sister and family. They're there all the time, and I support them. So we're saying we're going to penalize him, but not Costco or Vons or Stater Brothers, and so on.
I think if you read the proposed ordinance and compare it to the business plan marketing philosophy of, in this particular, your point, Costco does not sell, never has sold, individual containers of sizes as noted in the proposed ordinance. Most retail supermarkets do not sell the individual containers as pointed out in the ordinance, nor do your typical retailer, so-called drugstore, your CVS, Walgreens type facilities. They don't sell the beverage sizes as are proposed here. I think the whole point of the direction from the City Council is they've recognized that there is a problem, and it's the smaller single-serve beverage containers that are at issue. How they are, why they are purchased, for the purpose they are purchased for, and that the way they are used or misused in the community. To me, that's the motivation behind it. That's just my point of view. Do we have anything else from staff that you'd like to offer?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay. Do we have speakers?
Nothing for this item, Mr. Chairman.
Really?
I just have a quick question.
Go ahead.
May? If we were to remove the exemption of the 10,000 square foot or larger, why would that create an issue if the larger stores don't?
Well, for instance, if you were, well, I'm not quite sure, but the impact of retailers who are not established yet in the community, it could limit their opportunity to come to the community. Could. I'm not saying it would, but it could, I guess.
And if I could just add something, this is not a zoning or land use ordinance. It's not going to be, if it's adopted, it's not going to be codified in Title 17. So this commission is not actually voting to adopt a resolution to formally recommend to council that they approve and adopt this ordinance. It would not really be appropriate to make changes per se to the ordinance before we presented it to council if that was the commission's vote to so present it. But if you take a vote on, do you approve of it? Do you think council should consider it and consider adopting it? If you wanted to recommend to them that as a body, the commission believes that certain portions should be stricken out, we could take that to council and tell them that that was your recommendation. But the ordinance in its current form is what will be presented to City Council. We're just taking both this commission's approval or disapproval thereof, as well as the Criminal Justice Commission's. They voted to approve it at the regular meeting last Wednesday.
So if I vote for this, you will take that to City Council and say that I, or me only, or, you know, there's some agreement up here that we would strike that one out and that would make this to all establishments that sell single serving?
If you took a vote on whether you wanted to approve this ordinance or you wanted to approve this ordinance with a recommendation that certain provisions be stricken from it, that would be exactly what I presented to City Council.
So I have really no choice. I have to vote against it, or I have to have that put into the record, that we recommend that.
Well,
Not necessarily.
I'm not
It's
sure I understand the
an
question.
item that's on our agenda for review. Certainly the chair can entertain any motion that's properly made and seconded, so we can take that up when we're done chatting about it, I think, if you'd care to offer anything, or anyone else for that matter. The issue of packaging, container size, and that, could you review that for us specifically? I mean, I know what single serve is, but can you describe it? Describe single serve in spirits and single serve in beer and wine and malt beverage?
Well, what we have included in the ordinance are sort of our standard size minimums that we put in our conditional use conditions. So distilled spirits in less than 350 milliliters, I mean, those are sold in a variety of volumes. You have the little one-shot things, you have the airplane-sized bottles, it goes all the way up. So wine is typically in a regular wine bottle-sized bottle. That's basically what we're talking about there. Beer and malt beverage products generally typically come in a pre-packaged container of 4 or 6 or whatever it might be. So that's what we're trying to keep it to, so that people aren't breaking up a 6-pack and buying one and then going back in and buying a second one and so on and so forth. So, we did some preliminary, just basic research on the various sizes of the various kinds of alcoholic beverages, and it's a whole page of volumes and quantities. We could pick anything. I just decided to go along with the sizes that you have imposed when you do approve a CUP. They seem reasonable. They seem like normal standard sizes under which it doesn't really make a lot of sense to purchase.
Along that line, I think I pointed out in our study session that the brewers are marketing 2-packs now and 3-packs. Packages, I should say, rather than the 4s and the 6s, of larger size containers of beer and malt beverage. So based on this proposed recommendation, it goes to 6 or 4, right? So if the marketing of those beverages packaged in 3s or 2s, they could sell them. Would that be right? Or am I reading it improperly?
I think the intent is that it's going to be in not less than prepackaged quantities.
So a prepackaged quantity could be 1.
I believe that the understanding is that singles of certain sizes are not considered standalone. I mean,
So-
a prepackage of 1, as long as it meets the minimum, it exceeds the minimum volume, is perfectly fine. But
So if I'm at the risk of bringing up conversation that happened a whole lot many years ago from some individuals in the community when we established a alcohol beverage sales guideline. I don't know, how many years ago was that, Mr. Ludicky? 15? Probably.
Somewhere along those lines.
Yeah. Anyway, one of the terms that was used, particularly as it related to small containers of fortified wine, high alcohol content wine, was called a short dog. Wasn't that one of the terms that was used? So by using that term, that's really what this proposed ordinance might limit. The high alcohol content, inexpensive single beverage. That's really what we're going after here. And the half pint of spirits and smaller, because the 350 milliliters is actually what used to be a half pint, right? Isn't that about what it was?
I believe that is correct, yes.
So in effect, pints or 588 or larger are exempt from this proposed.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I think if you go to the Vons and the Albertsons and the CVS's and the Walgreens and that, you would not see these products being offered for sale, typically in our community. That'd be right?
I think that's accurate, yes.
At least I've never seen it.
I think with the exception of craft beers,
I have seen those, and like special sections with craft beers where people may want to.
So how is that, I'm glad you brought that up, and what would be the impact of the single bottle, whatever it is, 28 ounces or something, I don't know, whatever it is, how would this proposed ordinance impact that?
That's a good point. We have talked before when we brought an alcohol ordinance sometime last year, Brian, is that when it was, Mr. Ludicky?
Yeah, there's, as the Assistant City Attorney indicated, it mirrors what the Commission adopted as their standard conditions. This ordinance, as drafted, my understanding would be that if you have more than 10,000 square feet of public sales area, you would not be subject to the restrictions that are contained within it. Once again, remembering this applies to deemed approved type uses, not something prospectively coming in. The way this is drafted, someone with a sales floor area of less than that would not be allowed to sell, I think, any less than 4 if they're prepackaged in some way.
So if an application for conditional use permit came to us for a convenience market, less than 10,000 feet, or a mini market, or whatever other kind of retailer that might be under 10,000 feet, we could establish the exception and allow the sale of craft beer in single containers, could we not?
Yes, on an individual case-by-case basis under a CUP.
So we're not limiting ourselves into the future by making a recommendation or even considering it, right?
Well, once again, I would reiterate that this ordinance is intended to apply to existing deemed approved uses.
Right.
My understanding.
Mine too. How's it going to be enforced, if anybody's asked that question? Or have they?
Well, a couple of ways, I guess I would say. If conditions or activities at a liquor store, a mini mart, what have you, or in the adjacent area have been called in as complaints or under self-initiated activity by code enforcement, public safety, sheriff's deputy, what have you, we would probably then investigate at that point and see what the reality is on the ground. We do work with, the sheriff's department works with the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control and conducts operations and investigations and inspections at various establishments, and so we would probably start up a case of some sort and see what we could determine.
Well, let me be more specific. I'm the XYZ corner liquor store, and it's time for my business license to renew. And I'm currently offering for sale a list of some of these products regularly stocked in my business. Well, if this is adopted as an ordinance and put on the books, if you will, what will happen to my business in that particular circumstance?
Depending on what percentage of that XYZ store's business is comprised of smaller single-serving sales, it could have a substantial impact. That is true.
No, what I'm asking, and I guess I'm not being clear enough. So my business license is up for renewal, so I will be precluded from selling these products in these container sizes from that point forward if I renew my business license. However, until I renew my business license, I can continue to sell it.
No, that's not accurate, actually, because the business license chapter allows for the city to revoke, suspend, impose conditions on a business license at any time if certain violations are confirmed, in addition to denying a renewal of a license.
So if this becomes code, and prior to any litigation, contrary, then all of those 47 retailers that happen to be selling any one of these precluded items then must remove them from the shelf. That'd be about right?
That would be about right.
Okay, thank you.
On another note, Chairman Bose, like one of these examples has 59 calls for service. They're already on the radar for a chronic nuisance issue as a result of that resource management. So it may be a moot point as it relates to that specific business already, as far as revocation of their license, just based on the impact. So again, it hasn't taken place yet, okay, but certainly by this has brought to light an issue here that needs to be addressed. So we can get beyond the single sale, any action that takes 59 calls for service in a 12-month period at one location in the city based on the number of businesses we have here, that's a significant impact of resources. So that alone, just based on our chronic nuisance findings alone, they could lose their business.
I have a question, or a couple questions, Lee. Are there any studies to show about how much revenue average a business owner might lose if they have to remove those items? And then number two, on the calls that you are using as an example, how many of those do you think or do you know resulted in arrest?
I don't know how many resulted in arrest, but I certainly could come back and provide you that number. Just by looking at the body of my merely counted numbers, not so much in getting into the depth of each call, but any one of them that resulted in a file number being drawn would tell me there'd be an arrest related to it, a report. As far as the impact on certain businesses, for years my family was in business here with drive-through dairies. I can tell you that the single sale thing was not something that was popular with us, just based on the issues that it created around the premises. At the same time, it wasn't significant. Single sale. I mean, if you really think about that as selling one alcohol beverage at a time and the sizes here, I can't imagine the profit margin being that significant based on that. I don't know. I mean, I guess we could certainly look at that, or we could probably find out from some of the more corporate type companies that have in the past used that as part of their line, but like through Southland Corporation, like 7-Elevens or something like that, to establish what part of that business. But I see, typically the places I go, that's not what I see people doing. I don't see them pulling that single point of sale. That's usually issues of the locations that we're dealing with. Those 11 that I pulled randomly were ones that just because I know the address and some of the issues we've had there.
Thank you. I think the issue isn't with possibly adopting an ordinance and it moving forward to have more regulation and to make owners and citizens more responsible. I don't really think that's the issue. I think probably, if I could guess, we're all on the same page. I think where the turmoil or the question is it equitable? Are we being consistent? Are we doing the right thing? I think that's where the questions are, my interpretation of them.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to offer anything? No? Okay, so the recommendation is staff requests that the commission approve its adoption. This particular ordinance, unnumbered, be adopted by the city council. That's the recommendation of staff. So what's your pleasure, if anything, ladies and gentlemen?
Well, I'd like to move that we adopt ordinance number, the alcohol ordinance, there's no number on it yet, and that we strike section 2A and modify B to have it say modified to consume on premises.
Second.
2B to say what? Say that again.
2B says establishment holding any of the following licenses are exempt from this ordinance: beer manufacturers, wine growers, small beer manufacturer. I want it to say that they are modified to consume on premises. I don't want them to have to go out in the parking lot and consume them, take them in their car and consume them. They have to consume them there. at the beer manufacturer.
Okay,
wine
I think
grower.
I'm clear. Thank you.
I'm sorry, just for a point of clarification, those three types of ABC licenses, they are primarily, they're on-site, it's a winery, it's a brewery, it's a micropub, what have you, but they do, those ABC license types specifically also allow for off-site sales, for off-site consumption. So you go to a brewery, you go to Kinetic or whatever, and you get one of those growler things, one of those big things you take home and you have a party or whatever, that's the kind of off-site sale that those sort of establishments.
But the motion is to not allow that, to only allow on-site consumption. Is that what your motion is?
That is correct.
All right. I'm clear what the motion is. And it's seconded by Dr. Coronado-Rand. All right. Any further discussion from anyone? Please vote. Motion fails
fails.
5-2. All right. What's your pleasure, folks?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the adoption of this ordinance by the city council.
I second.
Thank you. All right, any further discussion? The motion is to adopt the proposed ordinance and to make a recommendation to the city council to approve the adoption of this proposed ordinance.
That's what I meant.
Without any changes.
And that's what I second.
I think I'm talking in circles. I'm tired of talking about this. Please vote. Because I understand that there's a member that has some other opportunity tonight. You want to vote, Ms. Smith?
Motion passes 6-1.
6-1. All right. Okay, so we know what to report to the city council.
Thank you, Mr. DeRico. We
Thank you.
appreciate that.
All right, thank you all. Okay, the next item on our regular agenda, and thank you folks for putting up with our dissertation tonight, and hope we didn't delay any of you from your late supper or some other activity. Okay. Item 2A, which is a one-year extension for conditional use permit number 04-05, tentative track map number 60348. Just for the record, and I should have pointed out earlier, that we have received on items 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D, which are all one-year extension of applications, we received from the applicant letters indicating that they concur with the proposed conditions and have no objection to the adoption as recommended.
I would like to, Chairman Vos, recuse myself as I own a property very near, albeit more than 500 feet, but I still believe that it's probably fair that I recuse myself as it could pose financial interest in the property that I own.
All right, very good. Thank you. We'll make note of that. So we have, we still have a quorum, it looks like. So without objection, the public hearing is open on this. Do we have speakers, Mr. Ludicky?
No speakers cards on this item, Mr. Chairman.
None?
None.
Okay. All right. Anybody, staff want to give us anything on this or no? Nope. Not obliged to. Nope. All right. Very good then. So without objection, the public hearing is closed, and we'll consider a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we grant a one-year extension to May 22nd, 2017 based on the findings contained in the staff report and subject to the revised conditions list, attachment to resolution number 06-39.
Very
I'll
good.
second that.
Thank you. All right, anything further? Please vote.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, thank you. Invite Ms. Harvey back. You guys went out for coffee or something?
Yes, we did.
Where's ours?
It's drank in the hallway.
Oh. All right, next item is item 2B, which is a tentative tract map number 60949, a request for a one-year extension. So without objection, the public hearing is open. Do you have speakers on this?
No, Mr. Chairman.
We do not. All right, anyone care to hear staff report? Nope. All right then, so it's appropriate to close the public hearing without objection and consider a motion.
I'll make a motion to grant a one-year extension to May 22nd, 2017, based on the findings contained in the staff report and subject to the revised condition list, attachment to resolution number 06-42.
I'll second that motion.
0642, right? Is that what you said? Yes. Okay. Who seconded that, Fabian? Okay, thank you. All right then, anything further? Please vote. Item 2C, oops, tell us how we voted.
Commissioner Cook needs to vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. All right, next item is item 2C, which is tentative tract map number 62120, which is an extension of a map for another year. So without objection, the public hearing is open. Do we have speakers on this item?
No speakers on this item, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Anyone care to hear a staff report on this? Nope. All right then. So without objection, we'll close the public hearing and consider a motion.
I move that we grant a one-year extension to May 22nd, 2017, based on the findings contained in the staff report and subject to the revised conditions list attachment to resolution number 06-33.
Thank you.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. All right, anything further? Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. All right, the last action item is tentative tract map number 62998, which is a request to grant a one-year extension. So without objection, the public hearing is open. Do we have speakers on this item?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you do.
All right. Could we hear a brief staff report, please?
Chairman Vose, Commissioners, this is an application for the extension of a map in the semi-rural residential zone for a subdivision of 15 single-family lots on 10.6 acres. This is the second of three available extensions. In 2011, the city built a drainage basin on the lot that currently occupies the area. Is that correct? Okay. It currently occupies the south half of the area. This was, and the city currently operates a lease agreement with the property owner that stipulates if and when the map is recorded, the city will have to, well, construction begins, the city will have to essentially fill in the basin, and at that point, the applicant would have to install a stormwater drain that would take place of the basin.
Okay, that it?
Yes?
All right, very good. Any questions of staff? Before we hear from the speakers?
Did you want to check if the applicant has a representative?
Yep, oh yeah, there we go. All right.
I didn't know if they wanted to speak before the speakers.
I'm not sure. Would you like to address us tonight, Mr. Percy?
Let's hear what they have to say first.
To take his chances. He's going to take his chances.
I don't know. Pretty risky. Hear from the speakers, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Colin Johnstone. Yes, please.
Take your time, Mr. Johnson. We're in no hurry. Is it Johnson, Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Yeah, good evening and welcome.
Good to be here. Never been in a board meeting like this before. Been in many others, but never one in a city like this. Okay. Well, my main thing that I have to be concerned with is I go to work, I live on Camino Hormonas on M2, and I go to work every morning around about 6 o'clock or 6:30. I have to drive into Palmdale, and lately I've found this huge traffic there. Traffic can be banked up for a mile back over towards Courts Hill and also ahead, and you can hardly even get into that lane to get through the freeway. So also the other thing that would occur there, and it has been occurring, quite a lot of accidents too, at 30th Street and further up too. And we have ambulances there and police cars and cars tipped over and all the different things that will happen. As the traffic increases, we're going to see a lot more of this happen. So that's my main concern, is that if we do build in that area that you're talking about, that we will see a lot of holdups. And it's already getting worse for me, but it'll probably maybe double or more, because there'll be a lot of my houses right there.
When you say holdups, you don't mean armed robberies, do you?
Well, that's a different story. But mainly with accidents and the heavy traffic, I think, is my main concern.
All right. Anything else you'd care to offer, sir?
Is what now?
Anything else you'd care to offer?
I could talk forever, but
You only have 3 minutes, so.
I tell you got a lot of time, but other than that, I don't know if I can think of anything else. My wife is also going to speak in a little while too. She'll be called up too.
All right, very good.
And she might be able to talk longer than I can.
Well, we, our staff, or all of us, will respond to the folks that speak to us tonight, so you'll hear back from us as soon as everyone's done
that would be,
offering their
that
comments.
would be really good. So appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Pleasure to be here.
Next speaker, please.
Donna,
Donna.
his wife.
Mrs. Johnson, okay. Hello, Miss Johnson. Take your time. You don't have to run. We're going to be here as long as you want to be.
Oh, I'm quick.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's just the traffic concerns that I have, because it's the road is very narrow, and I see bottlenecks. And so,
I'm very
and the
familiar with it.
school
I
is right
drive it
there.
every day, too.
Yeah, so that's it.
All right, very good. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Yes, Kristen Davis.
Hello, Ms. Davis, and welcome.
Good evening. Funny enough, I'm their neighbor, and my house actually butts up to Avenue. Can you go back to the satellite photo you had? Okay, my house is actually on this map. If you go out 32nd Street to Avenue M, my biggest concern with this, my husband and I are brand new homeowners in this area. We haven't owned our home, but maybe 2 years, close, give or take a couple of months. And my concern is when you leave 32nd Street and you're making a left-hand turn there, it's a blind corner going one direction. If you were going the opposite direction and trying to leave, going to the 14 freeway, or you're trying to just leave, one of two things is going to happen. The traffic is either going to go back out to M, or it's going to cut across and it's going to turn around and it's going to take 32nd Street. 32nd Street, I have noticed, really became a funneling point. There was an accident right after my husband and I moved into our house, so they shut the eastbound direction completely off. That routed every single person down our neighborhood. They gave no direction, and the only other outlet that we have is 30th Street West from M4. Causing that much traffic to go through our neighborhood, it was a nightmare trying to get to or from anywhere I was going to go that afternoon. I'm an artist, and I am a full-time caregiver for my husband as well. So I come and go all day long. I see the traffic pattern, I see the students at Paraclete, and I actually just recently addressed with Paraclete their issue with their students being dropped off in the middle of 30th. So my proposal in this, if this were to go through and you were to actually build these homes, is it possible that you can partner with possibly the school and have a secondary outlet for them as well? Because the amount of traffic flow right at that spot and the bottlenecking is going to start causing not only double accidents, but you're going to have a gridlock situation happen. By about 7:15 most mornings of the week, it is so busy and it's so backed up that the traffic that's trying to turn left to 30th Street West ends up turning around, and basically they sit through 3 or 4 lights until the people who are going straight can get out of their way. Oh, I have time still. The other thing I can put on the table too is I'm seeing stress on our entire system for the Sheriff's Department. We recently started a neighborhood watch in our neighborhood as well, and I am the captain for the Camino Hermanos Street. I am not seeing enough coverage for that to really make any sense, to have 15 more houses go in on top of a neighborhood that they can't handle patrolling as well. I realize we sit on the outskirts of the city where it's a lot more quiet, but it's just not logical. It doesn't make any sense. So my proposal would be if we can increase staff, that would be better as well.
All right, very good. Thank you for your comment. Any other speakers?
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right, then. So the speakers all were concerned about various traffic issues. And the last speaker was talking about the, I believe, the fatal accident that took place in that not intersection, but west of the intersection between 30th and 32nd. Actually, I was one of the people that drove through your neighborhood because I was eastbound on M myself at that time, although I knew where I was going. At any rate, it was a tragic accident, that's for sure. So, Mr. Luedeke, who would you have respond to the traffic concerns?
I can talk a little bit about them because actually the city is in the midst of a citywide effort on trying to deal with street design issues that actually contribute to collisions. And what we found in talking with the, particularly the traffic patrol people from the Sheriff's Department, they said that the vast majority of collisions that occur in the city are the result of speed plus something. Speed plus a poorly executed turn, speed plus some impairment, speed plus something else. One of the things that we're really looking at is trying to figure out how you deal with the worst places, which are some of the intersections that we have, trying to slow some of the speeds through there, and then trying to make the use of the street segments a little more effective. Everyone who builds contributes fees towards that effort. The city certainly recognizes, particularly at certain times of the day, you've got issues at 30th West and Avenue M, as you do just about anywhere where there's a school located in the city, because the vast majority of parents, or in this case students and parents, drive themselves to school or drive their kids. So we're looking at ways, we've worked with the schools to try to deal with some of that. I appreciate the one resident's comment about trying to come up with multiple access points. That's certainly another part of what we're trying to do. One of the things that works against us is that for years, rightly or wrongly, the city tried to design subdivisions with as few access points as possible. That creates some of the very situations that she's described. It funnels everybody onto particular locations, particular intersections, particular streets, as opposed to systems which tend to spread that out. I don't know that you are going to fix the particular issues here with this particular map, but in the long term, if that street does in fact connect northward into L8 or some of those other locations, that would certainly help alleviate part of that problem. As a former parent of Paraclete students, I can relate exactly to what she's talking about. And I have watched myself in amazement at some of the things that I've watched parents do. As for me, I told my kids, you have to go early, and I'm not picking you up till after 3 o'clock, because you were never ready to be picked up anyway.
Pandemonium, 20 minutes twice a day, 182 days a year. Those are the impacts to public and private schools. Actually, private might be a little more than 182 days, although they tend to, as I recall, when my 3 sons attended Paraclete, they had more time off than the public schools did, more holidays. So,
yeah.
And I think you had children there too, didn't you?
My youngest daughter's a junior.
Currently, yeah.
Currently, yeah. They affectionately call it half-day high.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, and the interesting thing, this particular map was approved in 2006.
Originally, yes.
10 years ago.
Yes.
There have been some modifications to it, and the recommendation to some of the conditions have been modified to conform this map to the particular general revisions to the city's general plan.
Correct.
So the connectivity issue is important, certainly, and this is a rural subdivision as opposed to some of the properties to the south, which are smaller lots, right?
Yes.
So, been at it for 10 years, got one more extension. If the marketplace supports the development of the property, Mr. Persley, who has developed lots of property in this community for a lot of years, may move forward, or it may just die. One never knows.
Yeah. One other point I would make, Paraclete High School actually does have an approved master plan for the ultimate development of its property, which would provide additional accesses, but obviously until they actually construct that, they are pretty much pulling people in and off of 30th Street West.
On the north side, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Go ahead.
So our only outlet is on 32nd, and it funnels onto M?
Yes, at this point.
Yeah, it's a difficult parcel to develop. It's long and narrow, and it doesn't hard to develop.
One of the things, particularly if there are obviously traffic warrants and intersection warrants are things we look at periodically. Several mentioned the intersection of 32nd and M. That's something that we will go back and evaluate periodically also. But as I've explained to a number of residents over the years, if you install traffic control when it's not warranted, that creates its own issues. So, but yes, if it's warranted by collision rates, traffic flow, and other things, we would certainly look at.
Well, it hasn't been too long ago that those intersections were four-way stops without signalized intersections. Hasn't been that long ago, and M and N as well. So planning your travel when before school starts and after school ends is what a lot of us tend to do. Occasionally we get stuck in it, just like Mr. Johnson pointed out, and it's an issue. You may sit there and go through 5 or 6 signal changes. That's just the reality of it. And the road widths are wide enough on the south side, and they would be dedicated on the north side as those properties are developed. So,
yeah. In many cases, the capacity of the roadway is fine. It's the intersection capacity that's the issue.
Prime location for a roundabout.
Perhaps. Continuous flow rather than stopping.
Right. All right. All right, anything else from staff? Anything else you care to offer? All right, then. Anything further from members? All right, then. So without objection, we'll close the public hearing and consider a motion.
I move that we grant a one-year extension to May 22nd, 2017, based on the findings contained in the staff report and subject to the revised conditions list attachment resolution 06-46.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Anything further? Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
All right, thank you. All right, we've had item number 3. The next item is item number 4, which is a discussion item, continued business, removal of the minimum parking requirements in commercial zones. So, Mr. Ing? Please make note of the record that Ms. Smith has a better offer in going somewhere else tonight. As the kids would say, she's dissing us. Have fun.
Chairman Bose, Commissioners. Sure, I'll take it.
Yeah, I know what it is.
I'll speak from the podium. Chairman Bose, Commissioners, a few months ago, we brought before you a memo and presentation regarding minimum parking requirements. And this is a follow-up memo and presentation. We were hoping to address some of your questions and concerns. The removal of minimum parking requirement is not commonly found in other jurisdictions, so we're a little bit ahead of the curve here. So in providing further discussion, we felt that we could draw from some of our own examples here within the city. This is a picture of the Forge, or Boulevard Cinemas building, and I included this picture because this is a building that was that occupies a space that was formerly occupied by a parking lot for the LPAC. And this demonstrates what the removal of parking requirements could do, which is to introduce more productive uses to land that would have been used for just parking. In the memo, we discussed the reduction of parking requirements in the downtown area. Typically, for commercial uses, we require 4 parking spaces for every 1,000 square feet. As part of the adoption of the downtown specific plan, we reduced the parking requirement down to 2 parking spaces for 1,000 square feet. And in the last couple of years, I think anecdotally, we can still say that there's still sufficient parking within the downtown area. Even with the movie theater here and along the boulevard, other intensification uses, we have found that despite the reduction in requirements, that there are still sufficient spaces. This includes festivals that we have on the boulevard. I cite the example of the Halloween event that we have, in which the city drew 30,000 visitors over a 4-hour time frame. During those peak demands, what visitors usually do is park along the side streets off of the boulevard, but even then, there is sufficient parking. And I don't know if anyone attended Bacon Blues and Brews. Hopefully you didn't have a difficult time finding a place to park. This is an image of a medical office building on Avenue J8 and 15th Street West. I called out this example because this is an example in which we did require the applicant to provide the required number of parking spaces for this use. And it's been vacant since its construction back in, I think it was 2008 or 2009. And I call this one out because I believe that this is an example in which the requirement for parking may have contributed to its ongoing vacancy. Sure, I think one factor is certainly just market circumstances. But I think this one in particular did determine and dictate the design of the building, which is a podium style with parking underneath. This required the applicant and developer to modify the architecture of the building, which may have imposed additional costs for the developer, but also it created a design for the building that may have created a situation that may have resulted in less than desirable spaces that the applicant could have rented out. So I kind of put this out as a consequence of the rigidity of our code. And if we don't build in some flexibility, sometimes what we get are very permanent consequences of our regulations.
This is a medical project, right?
Yes, it's a medical office building.
So if the landlord, owner, developer, whomever reduced their yield, they wouldn't have had to build the property as we see it.
That is certainly always an option, is to actually reduce the square footage of the building.
So do we find in medical that, similar to the last time we talked about this, retail compared to retail commercial, do we find the similarities or no?
There is a difference in
overparked and underutilized is my term.
Yeah, actually, for medical uses, the parking lots for medical uses do get utilized sufficiently because medical uses, especially if they're very active medical offices, customers come and go. And customers come and they wait and they go to their visit. And yes, I would say it would be they're more utilized than general commercial uses. And also as a result, our requirements for medical office uses are also more intense. It's one parking space for every 150 square feet versus one space for every 250 square feet.
Using this as an example, this building here, if it was built on the parking lot, it would fill up the south side, it would move to the north, and it would pretty much fill up that entire parking lot single story, and that would leave approximately a quarter of parking left. Would you expect other options to pop up for people that would need to use that facility to park? And who would end up paying for that? If each parking spot, we've been told, is $500 per year in maintenance costs, would other options present themselves? Would eliminating parking requirements then say, well, you can eliminate parking requirements, but you have to pay into this fund?
I'm not sure that's the direction we're going. I think what we're trying to do is offer applicants flexibility. We want applicants the ability to tell us what's appropriate for the uses that they're proposing. So in terms of eliminating minimum requirements, we're really not proposing to eliminate parking. Again, it's to give the applicant some additional options and flexibility.
Since I've lived in the valley pretty much all my life, I know people will park just about anywhere, dirt, gravel, everything. And there's a big lot right there. Would that happen? Would you expect? I mean, if using this as an example of the overview, if we eliminated parking requirements, then we have to think of possibly negative consequences. I mean, this project was built with requirements that we're now studying to see if they're now outdated, allowing the developer to decide for themselves. You gave an example last Monday of Wendy's over on Avenue I that's able to build on a lot that would not have been buildable. This building has been empty. Would you think that it would possibly, if it was a single-story building of a similar square footage, be utilized?
It's possible. I think actually I remember the applicant actually wanted to come back to fill in that parking area on the ground floor with some type of use. But again, it would have been difficult because they would not have met our minimum parking requirements.
Would it, if we eliminate the parking requirements, could he come back and ask you to do that now?
Yes, that's a possibility.
However, structurally, you may have an issue. You know, and the economic, or the decision that the developer made, his analysis of the marketplace and against the actual cost of development is a trade-off. This building required an elevator, and those aren't inexpensive.
Yeah.
You know, a 3-stop elevator exceeds $150,000. You start amortizing that over the common area maintenance agreement between all the potential tenants, and all of a sudden, instead of a 32-cent cam, you've got a 75-cent cam. And you add that to a market rent of whatever, all of a sudden you can't compete. And that would be my suspicion in this case, that it's not a competitive building based on the decision the developer made within the parameters of the code as it exists today. Yeah, my concern would be the medical tenant. I mean, most physicians are in groups and they operate 5 to 6 days a week. The individual physician, which is, I mean, this is a medical building. That's the whole idea of it, right?
Right.
Medical professional office, shall we say.
Yeah.
Most of the users are Monday through Friday daytime users, as opposed to a retail center that is 7 days a week, longer hours. So you have a more concentrated potential impact here than you would on a larger commercial development, retail commercial, right?
Yes, and again, you know, we want to put the burden on the applicant for them to understand their use and to understand and even manage their own parking, so that, you know, we get out of the business of policing parking.
You said this building would be able to fill in and reduce their parking stuff. Would they also possibly be able to put another building on the property? Let's say one of our intrepid business owners here in town had a massive parking lot due to our requirements. Would they be able to take part of that parking lot and put in, say, a small strip mall in it of units and then rent them out in the future? Or?
I think that's certainly within the realm of possibility, and you know, we don't go into this thinking that, you know, we're going to anticipate all the worst case scenarios. We are hoping and expecting that a property owner would do their research and provide a proposal to the city that makes sense and is reasonable. This is a reaction to a historically an overbuilding of parking lots. So it's a reaction to that. Yes, there are instances on occasion in which there are some parking conflicts for very specific uses that do have issues. But generally speaking, citywide, there is an overabundance of parking lots. And the broad perspective is that there are some very major, significant consequences to having excessive undeveloped land that is underutilized. So that's kind of the big picture. You know, if we crafted our regulations simply to avoid worst case scenarios, you know, then what typically happens is that we would be just planning for the lowest common denominator and be, and again, there are ramifications when we do that, such as, you know, creating a city of just low intensity, low density uses, and that doesn't generate enough value and economic return for both the city and the developer.
There were reasons why we have rules and regulations. It made this property here. Now we're going to consider doing away with some of those rules and regulations and allowing the property owner. One of the examples I gave is he could redesign his land, he could put up another building, another property owner could do that. Planning for the worst case scenario, why is that the city's responsibility to plan for that?
In the memo that we provided a few months ago, I think it provided a little bit of history or historical background as to how parking regulations came about. I think there was convenience was certainly a factor in drafting minimum parking requirements. We wanted to make sure that people could get to where they needed to go and have relatively good access to those places. And a while ago, that was actually, there was a thought that if you provided convenience and access, that it's an economic benefit. So, but in hindsight, while yes, we provide convenience and access, there is a larger consequence, and there is a long-term cost. We're beginning to understand the hidden costs of what we perceive to be free parking, which isn't entirely free.
So what you're saying is we, as a city, decided that we were going to help things be convenient for the consumer, but at the same time we were unaware of the economic costs, and so now we want to fix this problem by eliminating parking requirements for only commercial properties.
That's where we're starting, and I think, for lack of a better phrase, I think we're trying to right-size our parking lots.
will you be considering that for other zoning, like industrial and residential in the future?
The direction that we're asking for right now is just for commercial areas.
But you will be considering it in the future?
I think that's up for discussion.
We also have in the future, we're looking at self-driving cars. That's, from what I've read, it's only 5 to 10 years away. And if we have self-driving cars, parking lots would become a thing of the past. We would have great convenience with no parking.
I have a question.
Yeah, I think actually, Commissioner Hall, Vice Chair Hall, excuse me, I wanted to kind of piggyback on your previous question, but then you kind of gave a great example in your subsequent follow-up. I don't know how often your planning staff has ever admitted this, but we're sort of stabbing in the dark a little bit here. We've looked at something and we're confident enough that we think there's a better way, but we're kind of experimenting a little bit, if you will, to see if that better way is in fact so. Because you could look at this in 2 years or 3 years and say, oh great, it's done exactly what we wanted it to do. What are possible expansions of it? You could look at it in 2 or 3 years and say, oh my gosh, what a disaster. Let's pull this back. But I think what we as a staff are saying is that while we think we're confident, we think we are correct in the recommendation we're making to you, we admit that it's a little bit of an experiment, and it's one that we think from your perspective as a commission, we'd like to ask you to take a little bit of a gamble. I don't think it's a huge gamble, but a little bit of one, and see if we can move forward on this. But your point about autonomous vehicles and other things, yes, they may totally change the landscape in 5 to 10 years, and I don't know that any of us at this point can know exactly what that means. But I would like to be able to say that if we've already shown flexibility at this point on it, it might be easier to make that flexible move again 5 to 10 years in the future.
Well, we know what doesn't work. So changing...
Well, it works twice a year, on so-called Black Friday. You might fill up a large commercial parking lot for, an hour and a half or something. And might is the key word.
Yeah. I actually have photographs from Black Friday. They're not filled.
Go ahead, Mr. Graciano.
Thank you. Even if we were to remove the minimum parking requirements, city staff ultimately has the final say on the project anyways, correct?
Yes, projects come to us and they have to submit an application. Large shopping centers, they come before the commission as a conditional use permit. There's smaller commercial projects such as the Wendy's, as Vice Chair Hall mentioned, and where there is still some discretion, and the city staff would still have the ability to make a judgment on whether there's sufficient parking.
This on Avenue I?
Yes, this is the Wendy's site plan that is located south of Avenue I, in front of that Best Western Hotel that was recently constructed. And we talked about flexibility, and sometimes the applicant does have in order to meet code, they have to reduce their square footage. It's a little bit difficult for some corporations that have a very standard footprint for their restaurants to be able to do that. So their desire and staff's desire was to come up with the best plan with the best internal circulation. There was a lot of thought and consideration for the orientation of the building. There are some elevations to the building, and we wanted one facade of the building to orient towards Avenue I. Anyway, when we consider the requests holistically, we needed the flexibility of a reduction in parking to be able to orient the building in a way that is most aesthetically pleasing along Avenue I, but also provide the applicant the best circulation for their customers coming in and out.
This particular site has limited access onto Avenue I, right? The
Right.
particular
The challenge
piece
was,
of real estate.
Yeah, the challenge with this site, and you can kind of tell to the west is Amargosa Creek, and this parcel is somewhat of a narrow parcel. And given that it's a narrow parcel, there are a limited number of configurations for the site layout.
Approximately 30 parking spots there now, is that what we have? And how many would there be if we would have our minimum parking requirements?
The strict application of the minimum parking requirements would have imposed 36 parking spaces.
So they didn't really reduce it that much for this property?
They reduced it by 11 to 25. There's one row of parking spaces that's shown on the plan that technically belongs to the hotel. It's the row that's...
But it's not unusual to have reciprocal parking and access on commercial, on
That's actually, yeah.
multi-tenant commercial projects.
It's common, and that's one more thing to consider is that if we take advantage of reciprocal access, that sometimes we've done this for churches in which we've allowed churches to go into a commercial shopping center, but given their hours of operation, we take all those things into consideration when granting an approval to a request to operate. So certainly the reciprocal access would help for all future users of the site.
So if we're already doing it, then why are we discussing it tonight?
Well, we want to make sure that this is something that is explicit in our municipal code.
So you want to tie future planners' hands? Is that what you're after?
Untie 'em.
Untie.
So if an applicant came in and I think I mentioned at a city council meeting and received concurrence from the folks that are on the council that happen to be in food service businesses, that landlords and operators tend to understand their business a whole lot better than we do, who aren't in the business.
Right. We've tried to do some research for corporate requirements. I called out a couple of examples in a memo. Mr. Ludicky found a few examples from a couple of corporations. This is a flyer for AutoZone, and they have very specific requirements for building orientation, number of spaces, and the proximity of those spaces to their entrances. This flyer here, it demands for a number of parking spaces that is fairly consistent with our existing code. But there are other corporations, I didn't include it here, but it's mentioned in the memo. Chipotle, for example, they do not have specific or explicit requirements for number of spaces. And I think that gives them the flexibility to go into a variety of different environments. Sometimes you see them in more urbanized areas where there are not, where there isn't a big parking lot. So we want to be reactive to what users think is appropriate for their own use.
So here on the conclusion, it says staff asks that the commission provide directions to prepare an ordinance for consideration to remove city's minimum parking requirements in commercial zones. That sounds to me like that is kind of what we're discussing up here. It sounds like it's going to make it allowed us to have Wendy's there.
We are asking the commission to provide direction to staff to prepare an ordinance for the removal of minimum parking requirements.
So wouldn't the direction just be go ahead and do that?
That is what we're asking.
So let me pose this question. So let's assume that the code is modified to give staff the flexibility that they're asking for. And an applicant, once a project comes forward and you set the requirement and the applicant is not pleased with that requirement, then they would have the right to appeal to this commission. Oh, would that be correct? Is that how you'd write it?
An applicant can always appeal a staff decision, and
Right.
that
So if-
would go back before the Planning Commission.
So if whatever standard that, or whatever, for instance, if it was the Wendy's, for instance, and they couldn't get a reciprocal agreement with the neighbor, for instance, even though that's an underlying requirement on that particular property. I mean, it runs with the land, but let's just say it didn't. And they could only have 19 spaces instead of 25 or whatever the number turned out to be. And you said no, staff said no. And they could come before us and plead their case, and we would split the baby or decide what we decided. And if they didn't like our, the applicant didn't care for our decision, then they could ultimately appeal to City Council. And that decision would be fine.
I guess.
So that's the negative side of it, or the positive side, depending on which side of the table you're sitting on.
I guess what I'm wondering is, would the applicant be appealing for more parking or fewer parking?
Maybe fewer. Maybe your ultimate condition was, you're used to having 36 spaces and they can accommodate 18, and they're convinced their business model works and you're not.
My hunch is that the majority of applicants will still demand for a number of spaces that's sufficient for their needs.
What about us, some of us, more mature individuals who may require, over the years, better access to non-able-bodied parking? I noticed on the Wendy's site there was only 2, right?
Right.
And the aging population tends to have more blue stickers on their rearview mirror these days, right?
Yes.
I've noticed that. So is that going to be part of your additional consideration?
The city implements ADA standards, and that is not part of our recommendation.
Shouldn't it be?
If I may add, the city does enforce the code, state code, with respect to that, which says if you provide on-site parking, you have to provide so many handicap spaces per whatever amount of on-site parking that you provide. That would not change.
I think the bigger question would be is if we had Wendy's and minimum parking requirements were 40 parking spots, and then out of that 40 we had a certain percentage that were supposed to be handicapped, and that then whatever it turned out to be, say 5 handicap spots. I think Chairman Bose's point is we shrink the parking requirement or we eliminate it. Do we then eliminate the other, or is the ADA wrote in such a way that it has to have so many parking spots per square foot? Should we leave that?
My understanding of how that's written is that the ADA requires a certain number of spaces given the number of spaces that's provided on site.
Right. You had a question?
So I guess more of a comment. Well, let me start with the comment first. So I'm going to co-sign for what we're trying to do here based on what I've seen in the community. I look at, for those of us that have been in this community for a lot of years, the old gym code, then it was Kids R Us, Toys R Us, and every time I turn right there at that corner, I guess it's K and 15th Street West, it's kind of an eyesore. It's a large parking lot that looks like it needs, the cement there needs to be redone or what have you. So I've seen that. I'm using that as an example. And, in our study session, I know a couple of folks mentioned Trader Joe's and, what their stipulations are, going back to what you had mentioned about some of the restaurants. They definitely know what their needs are far more than what we do. They've done the demographic studies, if you will. Having said that, I think we as a city need to take a more strategic, stance on this. And so I understand what you're saying. I get it. And from your perspective, I don't know if you, Vice Chair Hall, if you're recommending that at each, when there's a new project that comes before us, you want them to come and ask if they can minimize what those, or go to the minimum parking? I guess that's where I'm getting lost.
Well, I think Chairman Bose's bigger point is that our population is aging, and I've had people complain to me that there's no handicap parking.
But he's saying that's based off of percentage. I don't know what that percentage is from an ADA perspective, but there would still be a percentage of what those parking spaces. So, because our other option would be to leave it, not have minimal parking, and then just have a bunch of spaces as a what if for handicap parking?
Handicap might be based off of, instead of the parking, it could be based off of the square footage of the building, similar to the way parking requirement is considered now, which then allows a certain amount of handicap spaces per building site. So if we eliminate parking requirement, they eliminate handicap spots too. And then
You have to have a minimum of 2, I believe, don't you?
Yeah, that's something that as we, assuming that we get direction to draft the ordinance, it sounds like that would need a little bit more explanation as we move forward. But yes, my understanding is that it's based entirely on the number of spaces that are provided
That's what I
on
thought.
site.
So having said that, going back to the question to both Chairman Vos and Vice Chair Hall, so are you all asking that we scrub this and just let the applicant come to us each time when we want to make a difference in whether it's more parking or less parking, rather? I think from a strategic perspective, I would want staff to use their time, I would say, smarter, and just put an ordinance in place. And if we feel as though that we need to increase the spaces, then we take it from that vantage point as opposed to going the opposite direction. So I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something.
No, I don't think you are.
I don't think anybody's going to come in and invest money in building a building or subleasing a piece of ground to put in a building if they're not going to have proper parking.
So going back to using Trader Joe's as the example, as we discussed in our study session, I think we as a city would be far smarter to maybe perhaps do a demographic study, if you will, to look at some of those businesses, some of the big, either the chain type stores, or look at the restaurants and just kind of get an idea on what they're looking for as far as parking, based on from a corporate perspective.
Well, I think that the request of staff, though, is to give the staff ultimately the flexibility to make a determination based on the applicant and their presentation of need or demonstration of need or whatever, and to take the number counting out of the equation. If you have an 1,800 square foot building, well, let's see, how many do I need? Well, what's the use? Well, it's general commercial. Well, that's 2.5 spaces per 1,000, or whatever the number is. Everybody has that mindset. You're taking that equation out of that count out of the application of how many parking spaces you might need.
Yeah, I should have brought our very large binder.
I've seen it.
Oh,
I've been on the other side of the counter. I know what it is. It's a pain.
Yeah.
It's a pain for the applicant, and it's a pain for the administration. It's not unique in any city or jurisdiction. Everybody's got one. Some are bigger than others, and some are computerized, some are in electronic form.
Just anecdotally, there's been situations in which a business will come before us, and it's a slightly more intensive use than the tenant that was there before. And on paper, we would have had to deny their location, even though we know that that location has a parking lot that can more than easily accommodate that use. So sometimes what's on paper doesn't line up with what we anecdotally see on the site.
And you have different styles of development over time with different parking applications when they were developed over that duration, whatever it is, 2 years, 5 years, 100 years. We have some structures in this community that are built in the 20s and teens that are still exist, and in the 30s and into the mid-50s. Look at some of the stuff on Avenue I with little or no parking, and they tend to be successful. So if you have a successful business, the user will find a way to get to you and park and or ride their bicycle, I guess. But yeah, it's also a matter of trust, I think, isn't it? And our trust in staff's administration of development standards, really, isn't it?
Right. Like Brian said, it is a little bit of a stab in the dark, but we want to be strategic about it. And, frankly speaking, most cities don't do this because it's easier to just tell developers how much they need. But we believe that there are some drawbacks to that, and that's why we're here before you.
Well, take a big box user, for instance, which are the higher generator of sales tax revenue, right? So let's say they are required to have 500 spaces because of the size of their development. In reality, 150 are used every day, plus the employees, so maybe 200 regularly. And at the maximum on Black Friday or whatever you want to call it, 2 days a week or 2 days a year, 400 are used. So what's the point of having that extra 100 spaces out there where it could be developed into another profit-making, generating sales tax entity?
Right.
That's really part of what's driving it. Is how do we generate more with less?
Well, that's where the paradigm's going to have to shift. Is what we're looking at is a big box retailer making us a lot of sales tax dollars, but their sales tax dollars per acre are not nearly as high as a mixed use area, which has very little parking, and that's where we're going to be shifting. And the stab in the dark is are we going to move to that mixed use type of system?
So you're taking a risk. I mean, how do you move forward without taking risk?
Well, I, for one, think that this is going to bring more businesses to Lancaster, and more business-friendly. I think it'll open the door because it'll be less restrictive. And like you said, they know their business better than we do. And I think we should support the staff to move forward. Just watch the provisions of the ADA. And I totally trust the staff to do the right thing and make the right recommendations with those applicants.
Are we looking for a motion?
Yep. Anytime, if we're done chatting about it.
Move to grant staff permission to draft an ordinance to decrease or eliminate parking spots.
So what you're saying is you directing staff to prepare an ordinance to eliminate minimum parking requirements in the city's commercial zones?
That's correct, sir.
I'll second that.
All right, the motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Everybody understand the motion?
Yes, sir.
Please vote. Passes 6-0. Pretty good guess, huh?
You're psychic.
I am, yeah. Commissioner Smith was excused early, so it was a 6-0 vote. All right. Director's announcements.
I actually have no announcements this evening, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Anything from the commission? Anything? Nope. All right, then. Public business from the floor. There's no public available to address us tonight, but if there were, they'd have an opportunity to speak to us. So we will stand adjourned to our special meeting for agenda review on Monday, June 13th, 2016 at 5:30 p.m. in the Park Recreation and Arts Conference Room here at City Hall. Thank you all for the very productive meeting.